here, and then I'll go back. And we will talk about political parties today and basically their history in our country and the changes that have been made in the 240 plus years to where we find ourselves today. Now, this is on page 216 of your textbook, but political parties are simply what we call linkage institutions, in that they connect citizens with their government. Even more specifically, the input from the public citizenry and how that affects the output of our government policy makers. So a political party really is just kind of a, not so much an entity, but a long-standing alliance that connects the population with their government. Other linkage institutions are elections, interest groups, and the media. So the history of political parties in America is one that does begin during the presidency of George Washington. Now, many of our founders did not like the idea of a party system. George Washington himself felt like they were it's kind of a system that would bring out the base characteristics of people. James Madison felt like they were more like a special interest group. But Madison's view of parties changed through his presidency as he saw how the parties were one of the best ways for leaders and citizens to work together. Now, we certainly are a country with a two-party system, and while there have been other parties, and sometimes, and there still are, there has been basically two main parties throughout our history that have controlled politics. Starting with the first administration of George Washington, you had a group called the Federalists, and we understand who they are from the Constitutional Convention. This group was led by Alexander Hamilton. And Hamilton was Washington's Secretary of Finance. And Hamilton wanted a strong economy tied to the federal government. He's the one who pushed for a national bank. So the Federalists were a party that we can, just by the name, understand that they advocated for a strong central government and especially that the government be tied to the economic interests of the nation. Now, opposing Hamilton and also a member of Washington's cabinet was Thomas Jefferson, and he led a group that was called the Democratic Republicans. And you know, he wanted the federal government to be not so much a controller of the economy, but a protector of everybody's interests, and especially the more common man and farmer. So we could say his was more of a rural agricultural ideal for a party. He did not want the government becoming too big and too controlling of financial institutions so that small farmers and other common workers would be hurt. So after Washington's 2 terms, you had John Adams, and then Jefferson became the 3rd president, and the first Democratic Republican was elected president in 1804, and the Federalists had 12 years of being the party that led the executive. Now, even though Jefferson wanted the federal government to protect farmers and smaller interests, he still believed, like Washington and Adams and Hamilton and Madison, that more of the elites should be in government. So Jefferson did not advocate for common people being in government. Rather, the planters who had large plantations and the wealthy landowners should be the ones who govern, and they would basically be like stewards or trustees. And Jefferson felt like his strain, the Democratic Republicans, would be more favorable to the common man, the small farmers, those that were not wealthy landowners, than the Federalists. In 1824, Monroe became president, and basically the end of the Federalist Party occurred during this time. While Monroe was president for 8 years, this was called the Era of Good Feelings, because the Federalists had died and there was really no major party that opposed the Democratic Republicans. You did have smaller factions that were characterized by their interests, whether it be slave owners or small farmers. You had these factions, but this era was basically characterized as an era of good feelings, politically speaking, and you didn't have really a staunch 2-party system. That returned in 1832 with the election of Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson styled himself as a Jeffersonian Democrat, but in his presidency, the Republican aspect was dropped. And as we look at these two things up here, when it began, The Republican notion would have been where Jefferson believed that your elected leaders, they are elected by the people, and then they go to Washington and they take care of the business. While the people back home, which would be the democracy, they will go about their business of farming, manufacturing, whatever they might do. They would not write letters to their representatives. They would not have town hall meetings because, it was a stewardship. It was a trusteeship. Well, Jackson kind of got rid of the trusteeship, and he basically ran as a president for the people that would then be a government by the people. So where Jefferson would have wanted only the planter elites types to be in government, Jackson would be fine with people like himself, military leaders, other common people serving in government. Before Jackson became president, he was the 8th president. The first 7 presidents were either from Virginia or Massachusetts. Virginia would have been, the presidents from Virginia would have been wealthy plantation owners who had slaves. Those from Massachusetts also would have been in the elite. So Jackson from Tennessee is a decorated Revolutionary War hero, and the War of 1812, and he represents the people. He is a populist president. Let me go very quickly to our assignments. And I may be confusing this with, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I forgot to put the details of the report up. I'm sorry. This could be the report that I have you compare President Trump. I'll get that up, and I will add, I'll add a few more days to the due date. Okay, so I think the report, though, compares President Trump with 3 presidents from history. Now, President Trump came into the office 3 years ago, saying that he was going to be a president in the mold of Jackson. He was going to be a president of the people. He was going to come in as an outsider, one who was not in politics, and he was going to be a businessman who came in, and he was going to fight for the American, the average American, the economy. So this report has you compare him with Jackson and then a couple of others that other political experts believe he's more like. But anyway, Andrew Jackson kind of took the mantle of Jefferson's party, but during his time it became what is called the Democrats that we know today. This is the same party that Hillary Clinton was a candidate 3 years ago, the Democrats. And it's traced all the way to Jefferson, with a little bit of change in those first 40 years. The Federalists died, and a party rose up to fight against Jackson called the Whigs. And they were they were kind of a continuation of the Federalists. They felt like Jackson was, well, just too much of a renegade, and they worked to get him out of office, get him out after the first 4 years, tried to, oppose him and his policies. And then the Whig Party only lasted for about 25 to 30 years. And when they fizzled out in the 1860 election, the Democrats were divided on who should be their 1860 candidate. The Democrats in the South wanted one person. The Democrats in the North wanted another person. And so the Democrats basically were split, and a new party, which actually was around in the 1856 election, but they lost, rose up in 1860 with a candidate by the name of Abraham Lincoln, who came in and won the presidency. And so now the two parties that we have today have both been in existence since the late 1850s, with the Democratic Party going all the way back to our first president in some way. Republicans are also called the GOP, which stands for the Grand Old Party. Republicans are represented by an elephant, as you can see here. Democrats represented by a donkey. So that is a brief history of the two political parties in America. I would like for you to know just basically two things. Well, three things. Know that Jefferson and Hamilton were the two leaders of the two original parties, and what they were called, Federalists and Democratic Republicans. I don't know why I have that backwards, but Democratic Republicans. Then know that the Democrats underwent a big change in 1832 with Andrew Jackson, and know that the modern day Republicans came about basically with Abraham Lincoln in 1860. Any questions? All right, for the next few minutes, we want to talk about what we would call party realignment, right here in the middle. And it goes in with party errors, where you have one political party that basically dominates for a period of time, and then the other party will realign itself. Maybe they'll take up another issue or a new issue. They'll try to appeal to a new coalition of voters, and the party is realigned. And they get control, and then they have their own era, and then it changes again after so many years. And we're going to look at four eras of political dominance, and then the critical elections where there was a big realignment. This is in a section in your book, pages 220 through 224. So here you can see some of the big realigning elections. 1824, Andrew Jackson lost to Monroe. And after he lost, he created the Democrats. So whether you put 1834 or 1832 doesn't matter, because 1832 is when he became president. Then 1860, when the Civil War began, was a key election when the Republican dominance rose up. 1896 was another key election. And although the Republicans remained in power, there was a realignment, so to speak, geographically for both parties. And so the Republicans kind of dominated from 1860 to 1932 after a period of Democratic domination. In 1932, during the Great Depression, FDR came to the office, and with his New Deal, with many social programs, the dominance switched back to Democrats, and it lasted until about 1968. This here shows some of the domination errors. This slide here has a Democratic domination of 1860 to 1800 to 1860, with the, even before Jefferson was elected, but I think more accurately would be 1832 to 1860. Although the Federalist Party did die out in 1824 when Monroe became president. Then the Republican domination, return of the Democrats, a little Star Wars verbiage there, and then divided government, 1868 to the present day, which has been a 50-year period. We see now basically a back and forth. If we go to Richard Nixon, then he resigned before he could be impeached. You had Ford for a little bit. Then you had Carter, a Democrat, Reagan, a Republican, and Bush, followed by Clinton, a Democrat, Little Bush, a Republican, Obama, a Democrat, and now we're back to Republicans. So we're going back and forth quite a bit in the last 50 years. One final thing that I'd like you to do, I think we might have mentioned this on the test. I don't think so, but go back to page 52 and 53 this week and read the little section. Again, it's not even a page. Read the section on Jeffersonian democracy versus Jacksonian democracy. And this basically shows the changes that Jackson brought that were different from Jefferson. I mentioned that it was a government for the people, but it was run by the educated or rich leaders. Jackson brought in the more democratic element, a government for the people, run by the people. Jefferson and his cabinet, the leaders back then, focused on democracy in political life. But when it came to big businesses and farms and things like that, there was no democracy. Labor was paid, those who were the laborers, they received very low wages, and the slave owners and the plantation owners and the factory owners, they were the ones getting filthy rich. So there was a big upper class and lower class, but not much of a middle class. So with the Jacksonian democracy starts seeping into not just political life, but into economic affairs and social life. So you're seeing more emphasis on more of a equaling of economic benefits, even though the owners and supervisor would still get paid more than common laborers. You started having thoughts about regulating business, passing legislation so that businesses will give better wages. Now that really gets ratcheted up with Teddy Roosevelt, but you start having this idea of democracy for the people, not just politically, but economically, socially. We're talking about rights, things like that. Again, Jefferson focused on wanting farmers and mainly agricultural life. Didn't want a lot of big cities. Jacksonian democracy, a split between farming and manufacturing. Jefferson democracy, limited government. Jacksonian democracy, also limited government, but with a very strong executive branch. So read that section this week. Any questions on the beginning of political parties and kind of a overview of their history?
No, sir.
So you last six, I'll get your political reports graded today. I'll get the report instructions up, and we will see you. If you remember, work on, if you want to, get some, you might not get all 25 points, but if you can do some of the debate, you can get some points. We'll talk about that Wednesday first thing. So
Wednesday, do we have a quiz?
let me check.
It says we do. On module 2, it says September 18th we have a quiz.
Yes, we do. I will get a study guide up too about what you need to know for chapter 6 and 7.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll do that first thing. All right, we'll see you then.
See ya.
Hey, sir.
Yes.
I may not be here on Wednesday. I may be having surgery.
Okay, we'll reschedule. As soon as you know for sure, give me an email.
All right, yes, sir.
Okay.
I
Anyone else?
might not be here Wednesday because I have a doctor's appointment in Tallahassee, and I might not be back on time.
Okay, when you know for sure, send me an email. We can schedule a time. I also need to tell Landry, Corianne, Connor, and Jacob. I have tried several ways to open your tests. Do you have your tests? Did you download it and fill it out?
Yeah.
And then save it?
Yeah. I don't know.
If you, did you download it off of the site as the Word document, fill it out, and then save it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to put this on you, but if you'll scan it and email it to me, that way I can get it graded. Or you can just screenshot each page, and you can email those screenshots as an image. What's that?
They're talking to each other.
Okay, if that's it, we'll see you later.